In the bustling city of New York, Edward Lancaster stood tall among the wealthiest men in America. At just 42, he had built a global empire in finance, owning multiple investment companies, luxury hotels, and real estate across continents. To the world, he was the perfect picture of success, handsome, powerful, and untouchable. But beneath the glitter of wealth and power, Edward carried a coldness in his heart, an arrogance that made him believe nothing and no one could affect his perfect world. Among the many people who worked for him was Clara Morales, a quiet young maid from a modest background. Clara was only 24, kind-hearted, hard-working, and devoted to her family back home in Mexico. She had come to the United States in search of a better life and was grateful for the job at the Lancaster mansion, even though it often demanded more than she could give. Edward hardly noticed Clara in the beginning. To him, she was just another servant in his sprawling mansion, cleaning up after his glamorous parties and ensuring his home sparkled at all times. But one night, after returning from a business gala, things changed. Edward, slightly drunk and frustrated after a failed deal, stumbled into the kitchen where Clara was tidying up. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Edward truly looked at her. Her soft brown eyes carried a mixture of innocence and strength, and in his lonely state, Edward found himself drawn to her. Against her better judgment, Clara allowed herself to be vulnerable. That night, a line was crossed, and what should have been a moment of weakness turned into a life-changing event. Weeks later, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Shock, fear, and anxiety overwhelmed her. She had trusted Edward, even if it was only for one night. Gathering all her courage, she approached him in his study one evening. "Mr. Lancaster," Clara began nervously, clutching her apron. I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant. And, it's yours." Edward froze. His face hardened instantly, the warmth he had once shown her replaced with icy detachment. "You must be joking," he said, his voice cold. "You think I would accept this? A maid's child. Do you know who I am, Clara? Do you know what this could do to my reputation?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm not lying. This is your child. I thought you would want to." "Enough," Edward snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. "You will not use this child to trap me. Whatever mistake happened that night, it ends here. Do you understand? I will not acknowledge it." Clara's heart shattered. She realized then that the man she had hoped might show some compassion had none. Months passed, and Clara left the mansion quietly, determined to raise her child alone. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day and waitressing at night, to afford rent and baby supplies. The pregnancy was difficult, but every time she felt the baby move, she found new strength. When her son, Gabriel, was born, Clara wept tears of both joy and pain. Gabriel had a striking appearance. His skin was lighter than hers, his eyes a piercing blue, the same color as Edward Lancaster's. Even as a newborn, he carried the undeniable mark of his father's bloodline. Clara raised Gabriel with love, though money was always tight. She never returned to Edward, never begged for his help, though deep inside, a part of her wished he would show up, if only once, to see the boy who carried his features so clearly. But Edward had moved on. He continued his lavish lifestyle, surrounding himself with glamorous women and business partners. The night with Clara had faded into a distant memory. That was, until fate forced the truth in front of him. One spring afternoon, Edward was attending a charity event at a local hospital. Cameras followed him as he toured the children's ward, smiling for publicity. As he walked past the waiting area, his gaze suddenly landed on a small boy sitting on a chair, playing with a toy truck. The child had striking blue eyes, the exact shade of Edward's. For a moment, Edward froze, his heart skipping a beat. The boy looked up, and their eyes met. It was like staring into a mirror of his own childhood. Before Edward could react, Clara appeared, holding the boy's hand protectively. Her eyes widened when she saw Edward. She had hoped their paths would never cross again. Edward's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, guilt, fear, and an aching curiosity. That boy, his son. And in that instant, Edward's world began to change. Edward Lancaster had always believed money could shield him from consequences. But as he stood frozen in the hospital lobby, staring into the piercing blue eyes of the little boy, he realized that no amount of wealth could erase the past. "Clara," he whispered, his voice strained. Clara immediately tightened her grip on Gabriel's hand, ready to walk away. But Edward stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the child. "How old is he?" Edward asked, though he already knew. Clara glared at him, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and pain. "Old enough to know he doesn't need a father who rejected him before he was even born." Her words cut deeper than any business loss Edward had ever suffered. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was undeniable. He had abandoned them. "Clara, please," Edward sighed, lowering his voice. I just want to talk." But Clara shook her head. "No, we don't need anything from you. Not now, not ever." With that, she pulled Gabriel close and hurried away. For days, Edward couldn't focus. At his office, he found himself staring at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers. At night, sleep eluded him, replaced by visions of Gabriel's face. Those blue eyes haunted him, the proof of his own blood, the innocence of a child who had done nothing wrong. For the first time in his life, Edward felt powerless. And in that powerlessness, a seed of humility began to grow. The search for redemption. Edward started discreetly following Clara and Gabriel's lives from a distance. He discovered that Clara was still working tirelessly, cleaning houses by day and waitressing at night. She lived in a modest apartment in a run-down neighborhood, struggling to make ends meet, yet always smiling when she looked at her son. Gabriel, despite their hardships, was a bright child. He loved books, especially ones about space and airplanes. He would sit on the floor with toy planes, dreaming of becoming a pilot someday. Watching him from afar, Edward's heart ached with pride and regret. One evening, Edward finally gathered the courage to approach Clara again. He waited outside her apartment building as she came home from work, exhausted but still holding Gabriel's hand. "Clara," he said softly. She froze, anger flashing across her face. "Why are you here? Haven't you done enough?" "I need to make things right," Edward replied, his voice firm but humble. "I know I can't erase the past. I was a coward. I hurt you, and I rejected my own son. But seeing Gabriel, I can't ignore this anymore. He's my blood. He deserves better." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her tone was sharp. "He deserves love, Edward. Something money can't buy. Where was your love when I needed it most? When I carried him alone, worked 2 jobs pregnant, gave birth with no one by my side." Edward lowered his head, ashamed. "I was blind, arrogant, but I see it now. Please, Clara, just give me a chance to know him. To be in his life." Clara hesitated. She had built a wall around her heart, not just for herself, but for Gabriel. She didn't want her son to suffer rejection again. But deep inside, she also knew Gabriel deserved the truth about his father. "I'll think about it," she said finally, before walking past him into the building. A father's awakening. The next few weeks were tentative. Clara allowed Edward to visit occasionally, always under her watchful eye. At first, Gabriel was shy around him, unsure of who this wealthy stranger was. But Edward, surprisingly, showed patience. He brought books instead of expensive toys, sitting on the floor to read stories about space and adventure. He listened when Gabriel spoke about his dreams of flying, and even took him to a science museum. Slowly, Gabriel began to open up, laughing freely in Edward's presence. Clara watched all this with mixed emotions. Part of her resented Edward for showing up now, when she had carried the hardest burdens alone. But another part of her saw genuine change. He wasn't the cold, arrogant man she once knew. There was sincerity in his actions, a gentleness she had never seen before. One evening, as Edward tucked Gabriel into bed during a visit, the boy asked innocently, "Mr. Edward, are you my dad?" Edward's throat tightened. Tears filled his eyes as he nodded. "Yes, Gabriel, I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. But if you'll let me, I promise I'll never leave again." Gabriel smiled sleepily. "I like that, Dad." The word pierced Edward's heart with both pain and joy. In that moment, he silently vowed to dedicate the rest of his life to making up for the years he had lost. The turning point. Edward's transformation didn't stop at fatherhood. He realized how shallow his life had been: parties, wealth, meaningless relationships. For the first time, he felt true purpose. He began supporting Clara more openly, not just financially but emotionally. He hired tutors for Gabriel, invested in his education, and even opened a scholarship fund in his son's name to help other children in need. The press soon picked up on Edward's change, calling it a philanthropic awakening. But to Edward, none of that mattered. What mattered was Gabriel's smile and Clara's cautious but softening heart. One day, Gabriel asked to attend a school event where fathers were invited to share their professions. Edward agreed, though he was nervous. Standing in front of a classroom full of children, he talked not about money or power, but about mistakes, second chances, and the importance of family. As he spoke, he noticed Clara standing at the back of the room, watching him with teary eyes. In that moment, he knew she was beginning to forgive him. A family reborn. Months turned into a year, and the bond between Edward, Clara, and Gabriel grew stronger. Edward no longer cared about society's whispers or reputational risks. He proudly introduced Gabriel as his son at public events, shutting down anyone who dared question it. One evening, as they walked together in the park, Gabriel ran ahead to chase fireflies. Edward turned to Clara, his voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Clara. But I love you. I love our son. I don't want to just be part of Gabriel's life, I want us to be a family." Clara's eyes shimmered in the soft glow of the park lights. For years, she had carried resentment, but she had also carried love, the kind of love that doesn't die, even under betrayal. "I was angry, Edward. I hated you for what you did. But you've shown me you've changed. And Gabriel adores you. Maybe it's time I let go of the past." Edward gently took her hand, and for the first time in years, Clara didn't pull away. As Gabriel ran back, fireflies glowing around him, he laughed and said, "Look, Mom. Look, Dad. They're shining for us." In that magical moment, Clara, Edward, and Gabriel stood together as a family, hearts mended, love reborn, and a future filled with hope. Edward had once rejected his own child, blinded by pride. But now, through pain, humility, and love, he had found redemption. And he knew, without a doubt, that this was his greatest fortune of all.